Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started again. So if I can have everybody grab your seats. All right, hope you enjoyed your lunch. Glad to see that you really were capable of finding food and feeding yourselves. That's wonderful. Speaks highly of you. All right, our next guest today is Veronica Andrew. She is a mother of 5, lifelong member of the church from Pioneer Stock, grew up in Texas, and is very, very clear about the fact that she is not from Utah. But we're going to forgive her. In fact, I'd rather be from Texas if I had my choice. Veronica's road, her road's been interesting. 10 years she struggled before she finally made her way out of the church. But that's been pretty fresh, just about 8 months ago. Unfortunately, she's had to deal with a fair amount of loss and grief in her life and has kind of become a bit of an expert in dealing with it. And that's what she's here to talk to us about today and share some things that might help us in processing some of the loss that we've had to deal with in our lives. She's currently in a mixed faith marriage and having to navigate that as well. So sometimes experience is our greatest teacher and brings us the most wisdom in our life, even though it's sometimes the hard way to learn and gain that wisdom. But we're grateful that Veronica's been willing to come and share some of that wisdom with us. So Veronica, come on up. Thank you for being here with us.
How do I do Okay. Hi. I'm sorry. I don't have COVID. I just get really dry-mouthed when I get a little nervous, and I'm a little nervous. This is a huge honor and a huge humbling experience for me to get to come and talk to you guys today and tell you a little bit about my story and what got me here and what has gone on in the decade since my shelf broke. It's been a really hard, rough road. Raise your hand if this is one of the most difficult things you've ever gone through in your whole life. I think we can all agree that this is right up there at the top. Just a couple of quick little things about myself, just because it might play into my presentation a little bit. So it was actually my husband who's from Pioneer Stock. I'm not from a drop of Pioneer Stock. I'm only a second-generation Mormon. My parents had joined the church when they were in their mid-20s. They met at an institute activity. They got married. They decided that they could bury all of their horrible baggage way down deep and cover it up with the church and make everybody's life just perfect, and they tried to do that, and it just royally effed us up as kids. I'm one of 7 kids. I'm right in the middle, and my entire life revolved around being Mormon. I wanted everything in my universe to be about being Mormon. I was an outcast in my high school because I was a pious little bitch because Mormonism was my entire universe, and my patriarchal blessing spelled it out that I was one of the elect, and that's why I was born in this dispensation, and that's why I was favored, and that's why I was supposed to bring people into the church. And raise your hand if your patriarchal blessing messed you up a little bit. So anyway, because I did have such a difficult upbringing, difficult past, I married the first guy who could save me from it. My husband, I love him to death. He's 7 years older than me. He was a little bit more established. He had some life experience under his belt, and he came from a perfect Mormon family, and that's what I wanted more than anything. And so I was 22, we got married, and I started checking the boxes. So before I jump into that, I apologize if this triggers anybody. Oops, I went the wrong way. This guy's face triggers the ever-living bejesus out of me, but it's important that we talk about for just a minute what he says here. Does anybody else think that he looks like a certain Simpsons character? Okay. So the fallacy that we all lived under our entire lives was that what we choose to do here will determine the kind of life we have throughout all eternity. We are never just living for today. And this is something that I prescribed into from the time that I could walk and talk. I absolutely believed this wholeheartedly with everything inside of me, that this life mattered only because the next life was fully dependent on what happened here. And I know I'm not alone in that. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is after this falls, after the shelf just completely annihilates, after this thing that we have devoted our entire life to no longer exists, or it does exist, but it's just in a puddle of ruin, what becomes our life and what becomes our purpose and why are we here at all? Because life is hard and life is shitty, and I think that we spend about 80% of the time in the trenches, and the other 20% of the time we're able to breathe. But the 80% is really, really, really hard. But we're taught that the reason why we go through that is because it's to build character, and it's supposed to build those spiritual muscles, and we're getting stronger, and this is a test, and that it will all be made right in the next life. But what if that cavalry is not coming? And how do we navigate after that? So anyway, we're going to circle back around to this. But we're going to look at her for just a second, because this is the first box I checked. This is when I was blessed as a baby, and I got put on record. And I just kept checking boxes. And I threw away all of my baptism photos, so I have none. But this is about me at baptism age. Just about, I believed in Santa Claus. But I was also making these huge covenants, for the church. So that was a box that was checked. And then I married the love of my life, and those who know him know he's a really, really wonderful guy. He is a good guy. Got married in the Salt Lake Temple. I put a smile on my face that day. Everything was great and fine, even though inside it was actually one of the most humiliating experiences of my entire life, getting sealed. And I know that I'm not the only one that feels like that either. So anyway, I was only 22, and I know by Mormon standards that's not like super young, but by worldly standards that's pretty young. And I had aspirations. There was things I wanted to do with my life. I knew that the Mormon paradigm to which I prescribed was that I was going to get married, and I was going to have babies, and I was going to raise them all up in Zion, and that they were going to go on missions, and they were going to baptize the nations, and all this stuff, right? And that's what I was supposed to do, but inside there was this turmoil because I was smart, and I wanted to go to college, and I was in college, and I wanted to study this, and I wanted to study that. But at the root of it all, I felt like that was Satan talking to me. Satan was whispering to me, saying, no, your job is this. This is your one job. And since I was only 22 when we got married, I wanted to wait a few years before having kids because I had things that I wanted to do. But the Lord had other plans, and I got pregnant really soon after we got married, and I was devastated. And I just want to put a disclaimer out there. I know that fertility problems are absolutely horrific, and I am not in any way downplaying that because I was not happy to have a baby. It was just at my time in life, it was not what I wanted to do. And I cried, and I was just upset, and I was like, this is the end of what I wanted to do with my life. And my husband listened to my lamenting, and he tried to do what he could, but he didn't really understand it. And a few months into my pregnancy, he came home from work, and he had this beautiful wrapped little package. And he had stopped on his way home and picked me up something. And he says, I think that this will help you find your purpose. And this will help to assuage those feelings of, everything that I was feeling, of my purpose not being what I wanted it to be. So he gives me this beautiful oil painting that was framed. And it says, the most important work you will ever do will be done within the walls of your own home. Harold B. Lee. And he, bless his heart, thought he was helping me. He was so sweet. He gave this to me, and he says, see, this is your purpose in life. And it is so wonderful, and you're the mother of my child. And he was trying so hard to make me feel better. And I just remember holding this painting, feeling like my stomach was falling down to the floor. Like, that didn't help. That wasn't quite what I was looking for in that moment. But I did it, and I quit college because our son was born. And I did everything I was supposed to do. And I picked up the pace like you wouldn't believe within the bounds of being a Mormon mother. I did everything I was supposed to do. I had devotionals with my babies and my toddlers every morning. Before General Conference was on YouTube, before YouTube was a thing, I had every General Conference for like the last 10 years on VHS. And we would watch them in the morning. My babies couldn't even talk, and we're watching General Conference VHS tapes. I mean, this was my entire life. This is what everything was. And I went on to have 5 beautiful babies, and I would not trade them for anything. But I did. I checked all the boxes. I did exactly what I was supposed to do. And in my entire life, nothing ever, I don't know, I felt like every time that little whispering would come back in, that little crow would sit on my shoulder and caught me and tell me there was something more. I wasn't living up to my potential, and I hate the word potential because of how it's used in the church, but I felt like there was something more to me. and I wasn't allowed to entertain it. And every time that would come back in, I would look at that painting on the wall, and I would think, no, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and anything else that I'm hearing or feeling is from Satan. The adversary is trying so hard because look at these beautiful future missionaries. They're going to go on missions, and they're going to bring all these people into the church. And by the way, I had charts for each kid, and where they marked off things that they had done. And I had it mapped out 20 years in the future of when they would be on a mission. And then I had to go and redo all the charts when they lowered the mission age, and I was so mad. But I had charts. I mean, I was living it. So those people out there who say that those who leave the church never believed or never had a testimony at all, they never saw my charts. My charts were really impressive. I mean, this is like, these are Jesus Christ's elect, the blonde hair and the blue eyes. I feel like is what was prophesied when we believed. I'm sorry, it's disgusting to me now thinking about that, but I really thought that this is where I was supposed to do, and this is what I was supposed to do, and this is where I was supposed to be. This was Mother's Day in 2014. I remember this day very, very well. Let me back up just a minute. I forgot to tell you something really important that happened in 2012. So 2 years prior to this, my shelf broke. And I won't go into it because it's not important. But I think like a lot of people do, your shelf breaks. You have that one thing that the shelf breaks under the weight of it. And you spend the next several years scotch taping it back together. Am I right? You can't imagine a life without it. That you do everything you can. The mental gymnastics are Olympics worthy of scotch taping this back and burying deep down everything that you now know that doesn't align with what you wanted it to be. And I spent 2 years doing that. It was absolutely terrible on my marriage. Like, it was bad. This was the time of year that Kate Kelly and John Dehlin were excommunicated. I had gotten involved in the ordained women movement and lost friends, almost lost my marriage. So this is where I was at this point. But I remember this Mother's Day sitting in church feeling so guilty because all of those feelings that I had suppressed so much when I was 22 and 23 and becoming a mom were surfacing, and I couldn't keep pushing them down. And my shelf had broken, and all of these things were bubbling up, and I couldn't do anything about it. And I sat there, and they were passing out like chocolate bars during sacrament meeting. And I remember sitting there feeling like if I don't have this, I don't have anything, because this is my entire life. And then just a few weeks later, that cute little guy in the blue shirt resting his head on my shoulder died. He died in an accident when he was 3. And faith crisis is hard enough. Faith crisis is almost impossible to navigate after something like that. I pull out a big example of my life because that's what I've gone through, but I know that everybody has confounding factors that have made their crisis of faith or their transition or their deconstruction or whatever you want to call it. Some people call it their awakening, that have made it so much harder. People's marriages fail. People lose their relationships with their family, with their parents. They lose the trust of everybody in their community. They lose any bit of security that they once had. And it doesn't have to take your child dying for it to exponentially catastrophize it, right? But for me, that was my big exponential catastrophizing event. And it's funny, what it did to me is you would think that it would have sent me completely over the edge. No, I did a complete 180, and I started living in the temple 3 days a week. This very thing that had brought me so much turmoil and agony, almost like having an allergy to the temple, which is how I was feeling about everything church-related at the day before he died. And then all of a sudden, I have people telling me that this was my wake-up call, that Heavenly Father was being merciful to me in my tragedy, and that he took my little boy, who was so perfect and so pure, and put him up there in the celestial kingdom. And that it was a blessing to the rest of us because we had a goal. We had something that we could look forward to. And if we continued to check all of our boxes and dot all of our I's and cross all of our T's, we would have that eternal life with him again. It kind of sounds like a really sick kidnapper movie, like with a ransom note attached to it, under the guise of being beautiful and Christ-like. Anyway, it's funny because church members who had really turned against me were now suddenly coming into my corner because I was going to the temple and I was doing everything that I was supposed to do, and they were so proud of me, and they were saying, oh my gosh, she's finally recognizing her potential, and she's doing all of the things that she's supposed to do because God knew all along that this was who she really was. And look at her. She's such an inspiration. I mean, people said this to me, and it kind of put a little bit of pressure on me to keep living that life. But you can only keep it up for so long, and it lasted for about 8 months. And about 8 months after the accident, I crashed and I burned, and I disappointed every single person who had come back into my corner. And I went into the darkest place I've ever been in my whole life, and it was, in the Book of Mormon when they talk about spiritual deaths and all that, and it's, great fan fiction, but the feeling is real. And I think that that's what had happened to me, and I was experiencing a spiritual death, not from Heavenly Father, not from Jesus, not for any of that stuff, but just my entire soul was dying. And I went into this dark place, and the criticism I got for going into this dark place was insurmountable. You wouldn't even believe the things that were said to us and about us because I couldn't maintain this status that people had come to expect of me. So Brene Brown is one of my very favorite researchers. You can snap for her. She's a fantastic researcher. She knows her stuff. She's a professor at Rice University in Houston. She says, only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. And I think that this is what people didn't see. They didn't understand that when I fell and I went into that dark place and I laid down on the trench floor and I wanted to die, that it was actually such a necessary part of the process. That it was, I didn't feel at the time, but it was brave. It was a brave thing to do because you have to fully envelop yourself in this darkness that you can't even describe through human eyes. And everybody who has gone through this faith transition has to do the same thing. And you will get ripped apart and crucified from everybody in your life who sees that this has happened to you because they say, see, that's what happened. She left the church, and now look at her. She hasn't changed her underwear in 17 days. People didn't know that, but they'll see this and they will use the church as a reason why this happened to you, when the reality of it is that you're actually just being reborn. You are being reborn from the darkest, muddiest, ugliest, nastiest, smelliest sludge you can possibly imagine. And that's what we have to come back from. And it is so necessary. So anyway, what do? What is our life about? We come out of this sludge. I kind of just picture I don't know. It's gross. It's really, really gross in my mind, like how we are born again out of this. But metaphorically, we all have to go through it. So I'm going to talk about my Joseph Smith for just a minute. No offense, David. Henry David Thoreau, I don't know if you're very familiar with him, but if you don't know him, get to know him. He was an absolutely brilliant man, brilliant philosopher. He said some things in his life and his writings that hit me so straight in the heart. So he had a rare opportunity. When he was about 30, he got to do what we all say that we're going to do for $1 million, but we don't ever actually have the opportunity to do. He actually went out and lived in that cabin in the middle of the woods and lived there for 2 years in this tiny, tiny, tiny little one-room cabin. And he wrote. He did nothing but sit and write and think about the world, and he wrote it all down in this wonderful book called Walden. And I don't know if you've ever read it. If you haven't, you should. About 75% of it's really boring, but the other 25% of it is absolutely fascinating, full of so much insight and wisdom. The other 75% is about economics and foreign exchange and all of that kind of stuff. But anyway, So he did nothing but write and figure out what his purpose on this blue dot was. And there's a lot of quotes and stuff that go around from him, and people probably haven't even read the book. So read the book so you have some context. But what he came out of after 2 years, it was like 2 years and 2 months that he got to live in this tiny little cabin in the middle of the woods. He said, I wanted to live deep and suck out all of the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life. In my mind, what he's saying here is I wanted to get rid of the bullshit. All of the bullshit, all of the fluff, all of the pretense, all of the everything that everybody says is the reason why we're here isn't actually why we're here. The reason why we're here, what he came to find out, was to help people. Who would have thought that the whole reason that we were here was to help people? And to lift each other's burdens. You know, I was talking about we probably spend 80% of our life in the trenches, and the other 20% are the Instagram moments of our lives. But those 80%, that accounts for so much. And sometimes it's hard to see past any of that. But I think that the reason we're here, the reason why I went through what I did with my family and my little boy was not because it was part of God's plan, but it was because there are other people out there who need to hear it. There's other people out there who need to know how we got out of those trenches, climbed out completely naked and skinny and just completely emaciated, that we did it. And we found something new to live for. Because oftentimes you just flat out don't feel like you're living for anything anymore. So at the end of Thoreau's journey, he comes out and he says, I went to the woods because I wish to live deliberately. I love that word deliberately so much. And we're not just going through the day-to-day, but there is a reason and a purpose behind our everydays. And it might be because somebody at the grocery store needed to see us smile at them. We have no idea. I wish to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. So, back to this guy. He's just wrong. Because when you allow anything else, whether it's a religion, whether it's a job, whether it's anything, to rob you of what you have in this moment, you really have nothing. You have given it all away. I've had so many people ask me in the last several years, like, how could you lose your faith? Because doesn't that mean that you're forfeiting your eternal life with your child, with your family? And the thing is I feel like, am I forfeiting that, or am I gaining something so much richer in this life? Because I am, our friend who played the guitar, did he leave? Oh, I just wanted to give him a hug. It was so true that we have today. We have this gift today, and we can't allow something else to rob us of something now for something that probably doesn't exist. And I don't want to rob or damage anybody's faith today because everybody's on a different plane, but I feel like he was just wrong in saying what he said, that I can look at every experience in my life right now that I'm having, all of the experiences that I've had with my child, with my living children, with my husband, with all of my friends, with everybody that I love. And when they die, it's incredibly tragic and horrible and sad. But I want to live in a way where I know that I gave them absolutely everything that I had to give them, and that I gave them every moment that I was here, and that I didn't feed them full of this fairy tale that, you know, I feel like it's just robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's really what we're taught to do, and it's so wrong. But that's us today. And none of my kids want anything to do with Mormonism. They've kind of opened their eyes to it. But Pablo Picasso, I'm going to end with Pablo Picasso. The meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. We all still have meaning. I don't want to say we still have meaning because that infers that it's just not as much, but we have so much meaning. We have so much purpose in being here, even if it is just to help somebody's day not be so crappy, if it is just to help somebody get through the next thing that they're going through in life. And more than anything, I think it's to be happy. that we can be happy in this moment, even not having the answers and not knowing anything. We can just be happy and suck it all out. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Veronica.